Welcome to the Checkpoint Certified Security Administrator course. So in this particular module, we are going to take a look at manual NAT. Firstly, we need to understand the NAT stands for Network Address Translation, and the NAT is used to preserve IP addresses. Okay, so there are insufficient public routable IP addresses in the world, and then it was decided that okay to conserve IP addresses that NAT be introduced such that within an organization you can make use of private IP addresses, and then so you can have about 100 computers having 100 different private IP addresses. But when it's time for some of them to access the internet, they would need to be given public IP addresses before they can gain access to the internet. Yes. So you can have a one-to-one mapping where everybody is mapped to like one private IP address is mapped to one public IP address, which is fine. Or you can have a dynamic NAT situation where many internal private IP addresses are going to be mapped to say maybe a few public IP addresses, or probably maybe mapped to just one public IP address as the case may be. Okay, so talking about the dynamic NAT, Checkpoint calls dynamic NAT hide NAT. So you can say hide, you can say dynamic. They are actually the same thing. And then Checkpoint also allows you to configure your NAT automatically or manually. Okay, so all we've been doing so far has been the automatic deployment of NATs or the automatic configuration of NATs. But in this particular module, we are going to be configuring the manual, like we're going to configure NATs manually. Now, why do we need to do this manually when it can be done automatically? Well, one of the reasons why we are going to be doing this manually is because we want to gain access to internal servers. Okay, now without NAT, users, okay, fine. We've said that without NAT, users within the network cannot gain access to the internet. So NAT is compulsory for them to gain access to the internet, whether it's a static NAT or dynamic NAT or NAT overload, as the case may be. But then, for users outside the network to gain access to internal servers, you must also configure NAT. But this time around, it's going to be something called a destination NAT. Okay, and then this NAT is going to be configured manually. So in this particular lab, our goal is to access this particular Active Directory domain server, which also functions as a web server. So we have web servers hosted, or we have websites that are hosted on the Active Directory server and also hosted on this DMZ server. And then we have a remote computer on the far away internet trying to access these internal servers. Now, to make this possible, the very first thing that we need to do will be to log into Smart Console. We need to create objects that are going to represent the web servers. Okay, so after creating objects that represent our web servers, we need to create an object that represents the public or external IP address of the firewall. NAT is beneficial in the sense that NAT helps you to hide the real IP addresses of your servers. Okay, so you can protect your servers in a way by hiding their real IP addresses. Okay, so their IP addresses are going to be masqueraded, and then when they are accessing the internet, they are accessing the internet with a public IP. Nobody knows what their real internal IP addresses are. So the same thing is applicable here. So this particular remote computer, when this remote computer is trying to gain access to our internal servers, on the web browser of the remote computer, the user is going to be imputing the external IP address of this particular firewall. Okay, the user does not need to know the internal IP address of or the real IP address of the server. So remember that we are going to be creating objects for the web server. We're also going to be creating objects for the external interface of the firewall. So let's proceed with our configurations. So from our admin computer, we are going to come to Smart Console, we'll come to Objects, we'll come to Host. Remember that we need to have an object for the Active Directory server. Okay, so we need to have an AD object, and then we also need to have an object for the DMZ server as well. If you have not created an object yet, all you can do is click on New, then scroll down to where you have Host. You'd input the name, say maybe AD server, or you can call this, say maybe your web server. Okay, so after calling it a web server, you can input the IP address here, say maybe 192.168.15.4 as the case may be. Then, if you want, you can select automatic NAT, or even if you do not select automatic NAT, we're going to be configuring manual NAT, like a manual destination NAT. Then optionally, you can come to servers and then you check this icon that says web server so that you can be given automatic protections. So you come to configuration and then you select the operating system type, whether, for example, it is Windows, whether it is PHP or ASP, as the case may be. Then you come to protections, and then you can see some special protections, protections against SQL injection, against LDAP injection, against cross-site scripting, and many more attacks, as the case may be. Well, I have an object already, so I am not going to be saving this, but I'm sure in your own end you would want to save this. Okay, so having created the object, the very next thing that we're going to do will be to create another object for our external IP address. Okay, so I'll just delete this and create this again so that you can get the steps clearly. Okay, so I'm going to click on new and then I'll click on host. And then when I click on host, I'm going to call this my external IP. So this external IP is going to be representing the IP address of, or rather, it is going to be representing the external IP address of our firewall, which is 192.168.20.1. So having done this, I'm going to click on OK, and then I'll come to security policies. Under my security policies, I'm going to come to where we have NAT. I'm going to create a pre-automatic manual NAT. Okay, what this means is that it is pre-automatic in the sense that it is going to be above the automatic NAT rules. Remember that for objects that are being created, Checkpoint helps you to create automatic NAT rules. Okay, so for example, if you want to create an automatic NAT rule, you can say maybe come to, so you can come to AD server as an example, and then you come to NAT and you check this box, and then an automatic NAT rule is going to be created for you. But then we're going to be creating one manually, and it is going to be created above our automatic NAT. Now, Checkpoint gives higher preference to manually created naturals. Okay, so if you create a manual natural, it is given higher preference. And then, of course, your naturals are enforced from top to bottom. So you have your manual natural at the top, and then you have automatic naturals below. So if there is no match for the manual nat, then automatic takes place. Okay, so for this, we're going to call this access to DMZ, and then for the source, it is going to be anybody. For the destination, it is going to be the external IP address of our firewall. Okay, and then having selected this, then for the service, it is going to be HTTP. HTTP because our web server uses the hypertext transfer protocol. If you have a different port, you can select that. Okay, for the translated source, it is going to be original. For the destination, it is going to be translated to our AD server. Remember that this AD server also functions as a web server. So I'll just explain what we've done here. Okay, so we created a natural and we gave it a name, access to DMZ. Now we are saying, so on the original source, we are saying that anybody or everybody are permitted to access this particular web server. Okay, which is why the source was left as any. If you want to be particular about who is permitted to access the server, then you can change the source and then you specify, like you put in a source. Now for the destination, remember that we said that users who are trying to access this web server would have to impute the external IP address of the firewall on their web browsers. Okay, so this is why we had this is why we currently have this external IP address as the original destination. Now the service is HTTP because our web server currently uses port 80, which is the hypertext transfer protocol. Okay, so when this traffic hits the web, if the traffic hits the firewall, the source is going to remain the same. However, that traffic is going to be redirected to our server. Okay, so it is going to be translated. Okay, so the translated destination is going to be the AD server. And then for the service remains the same, which is still HTTP. Optionally, if you want, you can specify the service, you can put HTTP as the case may be, or you can leave it as original. Now, having done this, there is one more thing that we need to do. We need to configure our access control policy. So for the access control policy, we are going to create a rule above our management rule. And then we're going to call this, say maybe DMZ, or we can call this web server access or any name whatsoever. The name does not matter. Okay, so web server access or something. The source is going to be any. Destination is going to be our external IP address. Okay, so having selected external IP address, the service is going to be HTTP. Okay, so we'll select HTTP and then the action is going to be accept. Okay, so we'll just change this to accept and then of course we'll choose to log everything that we've done. So having done all of these, then the next thing that we're going to do will be to install our policy. So I'm going to click on install policy, publish with install. And then after the installation has been completed, then we'll go to our remote computer to test what we've done so far. Okay, so as you can see, policy installation is ongoing. We would need to wait for about 15 to 30 seconds for this policy installation to get completed. So this is how you create your NAT rules. This is how you permit access to internal resources. You follow the steps that we've done and everything will be fine. Okay, so policies have been installed. So let's go over to our remote computer. So we'll come to this remote computer and then on our web browser, we're going to impute the public or the external IP address of our firewall. So let's impute that. It is actually HTTP. Then we'll impute 192.168.20.1. As you can see, we have gained access to the web server. Okay, so access to our internal web server was successful. So with this, we have come to the end of this particular module. I'll meet you in the next one. Thank you.